and then you start your debate round itself. You have it's usually 40 to 50 minutes where it's just back and forth between you and your opponents. And then sometimes the judge will give you feedback, but more often than not, there won't be any feedback.
Okay, yeah. So I'm just going to start off by talking about the structure of debate. So essentially, there are two teams of two people, and hopefully you guys have your partners. So that's going to be your team. And then there are two sides. There's the affirmation side, also called government, and negation, also called opposition. The terminology we generally use during tournaments is aff or neg. And you're given your side before the topic is released. So you already know if you're affirmation or negation before your 20 minutes of prep time starts. So do with that whatever. The person who opens up for a side will close for that side. So since there are two people in a team, there's going to be a first speaker, and then there's going to be a second speaker, and then we'll talk more about that in detail in a few minutes. But yeah, the first speaker is going to speak 2 times, while the other speaker is going to speak only once. This is the order of the speeches. So I'm just going to go through it. First affirmation will speak for 7 minutes. First negation is 8 minutes. Second affirmation will speak for 8 minutes. Second negation, the speech is for 8 minutes. Negation closing is 4 minutes, and affirmation closing is 5 minutes. So say that there are 2 people, and then you say this one person is speaker 1 and the other is speaker 2. Speaker 1 is going to be first affirmation, and then the other team, their first speaker is going to be first negation. And then the second speaker for the affirmation side is going to speak, and then the second speaker for the other side is going to speak. And you kind of get how that goes. So in total, affirmation will speak for 20 minutes and negation will speak for 20 minutes as well. One thing I want to point out is, as you can see, 7 minutes and 8 minutes, that's a lot of time, but we understand that you guys are novice, so we're not expecting you to be able to speak for 7 to 8 minutes, especially in the beginning. But throughout the years, you will be able to speak for this amount of time. Right now, you should be shooting for about 3 to 4 minutes, but obviously if you go beyond that, that's great.
Avani, can you move Athena too? She's not supposed to be here either.
Yeah, I already did that. Don't worry about it.
Okay, so moving on to MEDEF. So whenever you're building an argument and stuff, you kind of need to build your backing. So if I asked you, how does the US conduct their census? You're not just going to say, well, they just send out a survey every 10 years. You need to describe who's going to do it, who's the one executing the actual plan, how long is it going to take, and where you're going to get your money from. Essentially, with every argument, you need to make sure you build out your basis for your argument, your background. You need to build out your mandate, so what your plan is actually going to execute, your agency, who is going to execute your plan, the timing, when your plan is going to be executed, your enforcement, who's going to make sure your plan is going to be executed, and the funding. So where's your money coming from? And so in the example of the US Census, the mandate itself would be the US federal government is going to send out a survey to every American household. And then the agency would be, I think, US Social Services. And then the timing would be within the 2 months allotted every 10 years. And then the enforcement would be, I think, also US Social Services. And the funding would come from the federal fund, which is dedicated to the US Census.
Yeah, it could also, for agency and enforcement, it could also be the United States federal government or the USFG. And then for funding, it could be the Department of Treasury for the US. So, yeah.
You get to really decide what you want it to be. But you always have to remember that, if I chose the agency to be some random person living in Wisconsin, your opponents might call you out and ask, why is some random person in Wisconsin executing your plan? You can make up whatever you want, but you want to make sure that they can't attack you on your points.
Yeah. Next slide.
So moving on to criterion, you might ask yourself, well, who really wins a debate round? You have a judge, right? But how is the judge going to decide who wins? You're not really here to convince your judge of anything, but you yourself have to tell the judge, how do you want this debate round to be executed? How do you want it to be judged? You could tell your judge, I want you to judge this debate based on whoever gives you the best argument that helps the most people. It could be an argument about giving healthcare, and you tell the judge, I want you to judge this debate between whoever can give you the best plan that helps the most people. We would call that net benefits. It's helping on net on everything. Or you can judge it based on environmental benefits, whose plan does the best good for the environment, or economical and social, respectively, for the economy and society. And so once again, as the affirmation, the first speaker, you get to decide what you want the criteria to be for this round. But if, once again, if you judge something like healthcare and then you talk about environment, it's kind of counterintuitive. You don't want to judge, you don't want to argue about what's best for society and people's health and then ask the judge to decide who wins based on the environmental benefits.
Yeah, so I can talk about contention. So a contention is an assertion, claim, or point that supports your argument. It's basically a point or an assertion or claim. It also has to have body paragraphs that are in your argument, and it follows the same structure of the claims, grounds, and warrants like you learned in English, and there has to be an extra impact within that argument. You also have to link why your contention is relevant to your criteria with the net benefits. So um, we'll explain more about how many contentions you need in each speech. And think of a contention as a main point in your essay, like for your topic. So let's say the US should abolish the death penalty. So for the affirmation side, they're going to be supporting the abolishment of the death penalty. And you have to come up with 3 contentions on the affirmation side. And then the negation side also comes up with 3 contentions or 3 points, claims. Yeah. Do you want to add anything to that, Josh?
I'm good.
Okay.
So moving on to refutations. So refutations are essentially the way for you to argue against your opponent's contentions. You could either directly conflict against them, or you can use other various methods. So the action of arguing against a contention stated by the other side, you can either like prove that their statement is false, like just outright say like my opponent is lying and tell the judge why they're lying, or you can use other methods where like you can say that your contention actually refutes the other side's case already. So like I mentioned, like I could say to the judge, in my first speech, I said so and so, and that actually directly refutes against what the opponent said in the last speech. So essentially, like there are 4 types of refutations. You can either minimize, you can outweigh, you can turn, and you can directly refute. So refuting is the very simplest thing you can do. You can outright say my opponent is wrong or lying, and you can say why. Or you can minimize, where you essentially say, judge, my opponent's impacts, their contentions, have a very small effect. Or you can outweigh by saying, judge, well, that is true, their contentions are true. However, my side shows that there's a bigger impact, that my contentions weigh more in this argument compared to theirs. Or you can turn, which is very, very complex, and you might not face this in your very first year of debate, but it's very, very fun to watch, is when you take your opponent's contentions and then you use your own logic and you use facts that you have to turn their contention to favor you. And so refutations are as big of a part as your actual own contentions themselves. You don't want to have a super strong, like offensive argument and then have no ability to deal with your opponent's arguments. Your argument is only as strong as what you can defend it against. So moving on to points of information. So debate isn't just about a one-to-one conversation where it's 2 people yelling back and forth. We want debate to be as educational as possible, and you also want it to be as constructive as possible. We aren't just here to win, we're here to learn. So points of information are requests by opposing teams to the speaker holding the floor to yield a portion of their speaking time for a brief statement or clarifying question. So hypothetically, if I was negation and Ivani is speaking on the floor for her opening speech, I can raise my hand and wait for her to call on me. And I can ask a question. It's a very brief question about their plan or what she's proposing. And so the point of information isn't meant to take up time. We try to be respectful of other opponents, and we're not trying to be rude here. So the etiquette is usually to ask a question that's less than 15 seconds and to not ask a follow-up question. Or if it's a follow-up question, to ask it as a very brief question. And so the speaker can refuse. They don't have to answer your question. They can choose to listen to it, but just completely ignore it. And the very first and last minute of every single speech is what we call protected time, where you can't ask questions, except for the rebuttal speeches. The rebuttal speeches are the second and third speeches for the entire round where the aff and negation are providing the first refutations. You'll deal with this more in practice, and you'll understand what I mean by points of information. But they're essentially you asking your teacher a question, and your teacher has the ability to call on you or just completely ignore you.
Yeah, so I want to add more to that. Can you go back? So for points of information, you have to say it like word on word to the judge or to your opposing speaker on the other side. You have to like stand up and like put your hand up and say like information or point of information, and then the opposing speaker will say, yes, what is your question? And then you can ask your question in less than 15 seconds, and the opposing speaker has the right to say, no, I don't have time for your question, or I will get it after I finish my point. So points of information are a great way to make a debate more interactive, and judges really like to see when speakers are asking for a point of information, and it also helps with getting more speaker points and getting a speaker award. So yeah.
One quick note is when you go into a round, you might see some other people when they're asking points of information to stand up and do this little like hand gesture, or sometimes they'll even do the hand gesture and put their hand on their head. And so don't get freaked out by that. It's kind of like this weird debate archaic thing. So we compete in parliamentary debate, which is not literally parliament, but it kind of draws a lot of its ideas and its customs from an actual parliament, like the British Parliament, etc. And in the British Parliament, archaically speaking, people used to wear wigs. And so if you stood up too quick, your wig might fall off. So people would put their hand on their head so their wig doesn't fall off. And that same tradition continues. The other thing too is in Parliament, they actually really fight each other. Like if you watch YouTube clips, it's pretty wild. Like they call each other names and stuff. And back in the day, sometimes people would stand up and shoot each other. So if you want to stand up real quickly in a Parliament, people might think that you have a gun. So to indicate that it's just a question, you put your hand out like this so that they can see that you are unarmed. So that's where it comes from. I'm standing up to keep my wig on, and I don't have a weapon. I just have a question. You don't have to do that at all. You can just stand up. People pretty much understand what that is, but it's kind of a fun affectation that other teams occasionally indulge in.
Okay, let's talk about the first affirmation speech. So we do know that it's 7 minutes, but for you guys as novice, we don't require you to speak for all of the 7 minutes, just at least 4 minutes, or as long as you're getting the points out. So first what you have to do is define the topic that's given in the round. So you basically say, oh, this word means that, and this word means that. And then you also have to provide the MATEF, the one that Josh talked about. So it's mandate, agency, time, enforcement, and funding. This provides the affirmation plan for the topic and a base for how the opposing side can, how they can respond to this plan. You also have to introduce, you have to introduce the metric of evaluation, the net benefits of this debate, and how it will be weighed. And then you also have to introduce all your contentions and claims. So it must be at least 2 to 3 contentions, and we prefer quality over quantity. We don't want to see like 5 contentions in the first speech and just like listing it out and saying like these are my 5 points, but you're not providing any reasoning. We want to see that you're providing evidence for each contention and reasoning for each contention. Yeah. Oh, also in the beginning, you have to say like, oh, I will provide a roadmap of my speech. Like, hello, my name is Avani. This is the topic given. I will first define the topic, provide my MATEF plan, weigh the net benefits, and then introduce my contentions, and then restate my contentions. So you can say that in like the first 15 to 20 seconds of your speech. I don't think I'm missing anything else. Yeah.
Okay, now I'm going to talk about the first negation speech. So the first thing that you're going to do in the negation speech, this is for the first speaker, is that you are going to refute all of first affirmation's contentions that they stated in their first speech. And then you're going to introduce your contentions, and we recommend that you list at least 2 or 3, but just remember it's quality over quantity. So if you have 2 really good, really solid contentions, it's better than having like 5 really weak ones. And then for each contention, you're going to state your evidence and reasoning, like Avani talked about. But there is another option that you can do. Negation has the opportunity to come up with a counter plan. And this is when you can use a counter plan when you feel like you can't really find good contentions or good points for the negation side. So essentially, a counter plan is a policy proposed by the negation. And this policy must offer a reason to reject the propositions team proposed course of action. Generally, The counter plan will try to solve the propositions team's proposed harms in a more beneficial way. And you must show why your Maytef plan and contentions is better than affirmation. So if you're doing a counter plan, you will also have to do Maytef, as we talked about before. But if you're just doing, you're just going to do negation, then you don't have to do that. So counter plan, you have to do Maytef.
Let me talk to that for a second. So the primary goal of negation is to say that whatever the resolution is, or whatever the affirmation team is arguing, should not be put into effect, right? There's a couple different ways of doing that. One is to say, no, your plan is bad, right? It will have all of these unintended consequences. That's the base level, and that's really all you must do. But another way to demonstrate that a plan should not be put into place is to say, your plan should not be enacted because my plan is better, and my plan should be enacted. So if someone is saying, let's go get some In-N-Out burger. To disagree with that position, you could either say, no, we should not get In-N-Out burger because In-N-Out burger sucks, it's bad, it's too expensive, etc. Or you can say, we should not get In-N-Out burger because instead we should go get Shake Shack, or we should go get Chick-fil-A or something, right? It has the same effect because in both scenarios, you're saying we should not get In-N-Out burger, but instead in one, you're just saying because it's bad, and the other one's saying because something else is better. So the counter plan kind of acts as that second one to say, instead of doing your plan, we should do my plan. But if you are advocating for a plan, now you kind of have taken on the sort of an affirmation mindset where you have to lay out what that plan is and how it's going to work and what are the benefits of your plan that outweigh the benefits of theirs. So those are options. You're not required to have a counter plan, but it is one way to refute, is to say we shouldn't do your plan, not because it's bad, because mine is better.
Yeah. So after that comes the second affirmation speech, which is 8 minutes. So with this, when the first affirmation speaker has stated their first or their 3 contentions, you have to refute those contentions. And if they come up with a counter plan, you still must refute their contentions within that counter plan and explain, like Mr. Kissler said, how your points outweigh their whole plan and their whole contention. You also have to be defending your contentions with more evidence and reasoning. So for the second affirmation speaker, you have to list, or you have to provide new evidence and reasoning to defend your contentions and explain why your contentions are better, they're better than their contentions and their counter plan. This also, at the very end, you could repeat and elaborate on your contentions just so that the judges can see that you've restated your contentions, you've provided enough new evidence and new reasoning to further strengthen your contentions. Yeah.
Now for the second negation speech, which is 8 minutes, it's pretty similar to the structure of the second affirmation speech. You're first going to refute all of second affirmation's contentions. You could also bring like new information. And then you want to defend your own contentions with new evidence and reasoning. And lastly, you can repeat and elaborate on your contentions. And just remember that if you made a counter plan, repeat and elaborate, like you have to. So that's the second negation speech. And it's pretty similar to the affirmation speech. And then you have the negation, rebuttal, or closing speech. Now this comes right after the second negation speech. And this is why negation is kind of at a disadvantage, because while the affirmation closing speech, they get to go last. So they get to make their point across like it's fresh in the judge's brain when they're judging. So it's important that your negation closing speech is super powerful. And I'll talk about how you can do that. So first you're going to defend your position. And remember, you cannot introduce any new information. So you can't bring any new study or any new facts. You just have to use the existing information that you talked about. If you do introduce new information, the opposing team, they can call you out on it. But if they don't, just don't say anything about it. Yeah. And it's your final chance to tell the judge why your contentions are better than the affirmation. And a way that you can do this is by weighing impacts. When you weigh impacts, you're basically comparing the impacts presented in both cases, and I'll talk about that later too. But yeah, that's how the closing speech is structured.
Yeah, the last speech is from the first person that spoke in the beginning, and that's the first speaker, and it's called the affirmation rebuttal / closing speech, and this is about 5 minutes. So this is a very important part of the debate round. Like this is like the conclusion of the whole round. So you have to defend your position. Remember, you can't introduce any new information because the other speakers cannot refute these points or your new evidence. So you have to basically defend your position with, just defend your position and then summarize what has been happening. So you can say, oh, the opposing side has been saying this, this, and this, but our side is saying this, this, and this with our evidence and reasoning, which is why you should vote for our side. And then also you have to weigh the impacts of this debate, like Josh said. You have to weigh about the net benefits, the social, net, environmental benefits. And Josh, do you want to add anything to this, because it's like pretty important?
There's just one thing to add. I just have one thing to add.
Okay.
So between your negation and rebuttal speeches, it is a good idea to restate your contentions and to finalize your rebuttals. But what you mainly want to be focusing on is to convince the judge, to basically tell the judge, this is what you should have on your notes at the end of the day. You want to just give your judge the easiest way for them to judge the round and to not have to make them look at the notes. You want to summarize the speech and to also, while like summarizing it for them, give your own thoughts in it. We usually do what we call a world analysis, a world comparison, where you compare the two sides. You tell the judge, like, this is what my plan does at the end of the day, and this is the end results of what the other side does. No matter what they're going to say in the next speech or what they said in the last speech, this is just on paper, this is what it's going to look like. This is all you have to consider, judge. And that's how you determine who to win. Yep. You don't really like have to go too far in depth into the arguments of the entire round, but you just want to make the judge, let them have the easiest job they can, and just summarize everything you can. Summarize as simply as you can.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, now I'm going to be talking about impacts. There are 3 types of impacts you can have. The first is magnitude, and this is basically asking how severe is the impact. And then you have scope, which is how broad is the impact felt across the population, and probability, which is how likely is the event. And the 2 most important ones are probability and magnitude. So those are really the ones that have the most weight in a debate round. To kind of elaborate on probability, for example, if I were to compare, like, say that I said a nuclear war will occur compared to millions of people will lose their jobs, it's pretty safe to say that millions of people losing their jobs is more probable than a nuclear war starting or World War III. So that's going to have more weight in the debate round. And an example of magnitude would be, is this only going to affect people in California? Is it going to impact people in the United States? Or is this going to impact people all over the world? And a way that you can kind of add this into your closing speech is by comparing how your plan versus the opposition's plan will compare. So if I'm trying to defend my own position, I'll be like, the magnitude of my plan is a lot more broad. This is going to affect people all over the world, and it's a lot more likely to happen compared to the other team. And then you would say, like, the other team, it's only going to affect people in California, and it's very unlikely to happen. And that's how you would weigh impacts in a debate round.
Sorry, can I add one thing?
Add anything you want.
Just a small thing in terms of impacts. These are essentially your end effects. And so you want to be careful in linking your arguments to your end effects, like, because this, then that happens. But you also don't want your impacts to be too minimal. Also, it doesn't really matter, right? It doesn't matter if 2 people die compared to the other opponent's argument where tens of millions of people die. But you also don't want to be too, like, ridiculous where you're linking complete nuclear war to someone losing their job. It's a very careful balance between very severe impacts and very negligible impacts. You want to be right in the center where it's a good argument that it's actually defensible.
Yeah, so these are the type of topics that we will see in Novice. The main ones are policy debates. So those are like, we should do this because of this. Those are like those are the most common types of debate topics in Novice. There's also value and fact, which is like, oh, I'll say death penalty again. The death penalty is good or bad. Or yeah, you won't really see like good or bad or true or false in these rounds, but those are like the type of topics that are common in parley debate. Yeah.
The value, like, ones you're going to see more often is usually when it's 2 competing an important value. So the one I've seen over and over again is something like, in the following circumstance, countries should prioritize privacy over security, right? Or when it comes to surveillance, we should prioritize privacy over security. So AF would say, you know what? Honestly, when it comes down to it, yes, we could catch some terrorists by surveilling them, but the amount of civil rights that we would give up in the meantime is not worth it. And the other side would say, no, 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 because civil rights are important, but you can't enjoy them if you're dead. And so we have to protect people by surveilling them. And so it's not usually something X is good or bad. A lot of times it's juxtaposing like two values, which are both good, and saying in this particular circumstance, one should be prioritized over the other.
Okay, so we made like a rough outline of this thing called a flowchart. So a flowchart is a thing that just helps for the judge and for both the negation and the affirmation side to see if their points flow throughout the debate. So we'll go more through this. We just wanted to give you an example. So here's a topic that was from one of the debate tournaments in September. So it says the United States should pass a constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College and elect the president by national popular vote. So that is the topic. And then this is the flow chart. So this is necessary while debating. I mean, it's really important to use this. It just helps with the flow and like looking at if the opposing side has refuted their point, the other point. And the judge also uses this and like they make their own flow chart while the debate round is happening. So we gave an example of who's AF1 and neg1. So I'm the first speaker, and then Josh is the second speaker, and then I'm speaking again at the very end as the rebuttal. And then on the negation side is Kayla as the first speaker, and then she's also the rebuttal at the very end for negation 3. And then Mohan is going to be the second negation speaker. So this is like a rough outline of the flowchart. We tried to make it as inclusive as possible with like the whole outline. So as you can see here with the topic, you have to define constitutional amendment, electoral college, and popular vote, because you have to know that these judges are mostly parent judges. They don't really know that much about the topic or as much as info as we do. So we have to provide as much clarity as possible to them. And that's, yeah. And then we have MATEF, so you have to do the mandate, agency, time, enforcement, and funding. So I just gave like a rough example, like, oh, the mandate is the topic, and you're supporting that the affirmation is supporting that the United States should pass a constitutional amendment. And then the agency will probably be like the United States House of Representatives in Congress, and then the Senate, because they passed the amendments. Time would probably be like 4 to 5 years. Then again, I need to restate that this is like my MATEF plan. It can be different for the other people, for the other people who are doing the same topic. So I said for my time like 4 to 5 years, with the next election coming up in 2024. And then I said the enforcement would be the United States federal government. And then for funding, I said the United States Department of Treasury or increasing taxes. Then again, this is very basic. It's just a rough outline. You don't have to go by this. And then we see here that you have to let the judge know that you're gonna determine how you have to weigh the impacts, whether it be net, social, or environmental benefits. So you need to choose one of those. And then we gave like a rough outline of how you can write your speech. So you have the first point. So with this one, I want to make it as interactive as possible. So does anyone want to come up with the first point? Josh, do you want to come up with the first point? Or Shreya? Trying to make it fun. No one? Mr. Kistler, do you have one?
Yeah. Okay, so it's about the Electoral College, and we say national vote good.
Yes.
So democracy works
Yeah.
best when people's will is listened to. Democracy is good when we listen to people.
Yeah. So that could be one of our first points for the affirmation side. So during your prep time, you have to come up with these contentions and also provide evidence and reasoning. And you get your evidence. We're going to go more about this in the later slides of how to prep in your rounds. So for evidence, you have to look up online on websites that are, what's the word called? I'm missing it. I'm forgetting it. Credible, yes, credible websites. So you can get your evidence from them, and then you have to like make up your reasoning and that supports your contention, which also supports the affirmation side for the topic. This applies with the second point and the third point.
Yeah, so I'd say let's see, for the first point, I would say something to the effect of democracy is better than oligarchy, because those are really what the two sides are. And then the second point, I might try to expand and say, okay, that's sort of a theoretical point about like democracy as a system is better, but I shouldn't just hammer away on like, this is theoretically better. I also have to think about impact, right? You have to say, okay, well, when in the past have we had an electoral college victory, but a popular vote defeat? Well, it's happened twice in the last 4 presidential elections. It's happened twice, where the person who lost the presidency got the most votes, and people get pissed. Like in 2000, it happened with Bush v. Gore, and there were literally riots and people breaking into like ballot counting offices. And you consider the possibility of it happening this time around. You know, you're talking about calling out the National Guard, civil unrest in the streets. Oh, there you go, boom. That is a very practical impact. When you have someone who loses the popular vote and wins the electoral college, it creates chaos in the streets. It creates the potential for literal civil war, and that you could impact out how a potential chaos in the streets, civil war, protesting would result in death, destruction. So that's a very practical impact, which is different than democracy is good. So when you're thinking through your points, you want to have a sort of a diversity of genre of points. You want to have some things which are sort of like moral or theoretical, or like potential, and some things which are extremely practical and like impact oriented, because you need both. I would say between the two, the one that judges tend to take into account the most is the practical side of things. Do we want to avoid a civil war and death in the streets? Okay, then we must do this. That tends to like weigh heavier with them. But it really comes down to your weighing mechanism. If you establish a weighing mechanism of being practical net benefits, you should probably lean more towards net benefits. Who cares if it's moral or immoral? Let's talk about whether it's good for people, whether it benefits them. So that's where you have sort of you should have a connection between the weighing mechanism that you choose and then the types of claims that you make underneath it.
Yep. And then for the negation side, so we see Kayla as the first speaker. So for this topic, I think it's best to come up with 3 contentions instead of coming up with a counter plan. So they could refute the first point about having more of a democratic say in this election.
Well, hold on, Ivani. So why is it that we don't have a counter plan in the neg? Why is it I think you're correct, but why is a counter plan a really bad idea with this resolution? Can anyone tell me?
Yeah, they can answer.
Yeah. Why should you not choose a counter plan in this neg?
Can I try answering?
Yeah, please.
Okay, I feel like in order to come up with a counter plan, because this is related to like the government and the way the government is run, so coming up with a counter plan would be like changing many aspects of the government.
But that's what the AF side of this is trying to do. It's trying to change aspects of the government. So let's take a look at the resolution. The United States should pass a constitutional amendment to abolish the Electoral College and elect the president by a national popular vote. What part of that is the new part? Meaning, what's the change that we're advocating for?
People are, the president wins by popular vote instead of electoral college.
Good. So, well, just the first part of that. That's the change we're looking for. So the AF is saying we should change the mechanism from what it is to this new thing. So if the neg comes along and says, no, we should not change it. In fact, we should have this different plan, which is a change. Then you're arguing that you should change it. In the resolution itself, it says that we should stop doing the status quo and we should do this new thing. So if you come up with a counter plan, it's nonsense, because the resolution forces you to argue for the status quo. It says, if you don't like this change, then you would argue for what we already have, which is the Electoral College. So you would have to come up with this third system that is neither Electoral College nor popular vote, and then advocate for that system, which I think is bonkers, because those are really the only 2 options, right?
Yeah.
So it would be very difficult to come up with a counter plan, because the resolution itself kind of gives you the 2 sides. Should we keep the plan that we have, or should we have this new plan? So in this case, as neg, you say, it's not worth my time to try to invent this new wheel. I'm just going to stick with what we have and say why the Electoral College is better than this change.
Yep, thank you. And so yeah, for the negation side, you could say you're advocating for how we should keep the status quo. That's one thing we didn't mention in the previous slides. The negation is advocating for the status quo. The status quo means what is happening currently right now. So you're saying that we should keep it the way it is, or instead of that, you could come up with a counter plan. So so you come up with your 3 contentions after refuting their points. So I'm going to try and annotate and Yeah, I want to annotate and put like arrows here. Kayla, could you do that? I forgot how to do that. I think you can do it because you're sharing the slides.
Yeah, I'm doing this on my laptop, so it's gonna be very like messy, but yeah, just tell me where you want me to draw them.
So just yeah, so for the first point F.
Oh my God. Let me check.
Okay, it's okay, we have time. Just like get like a line or like draw. And so from first point F, just go to refute to first point, just draw a line. Yep. So that's a way of how the judge connects if the points are flowing. So you can see that the negation has refuted, like let's say the negation has refuted their first point. So the judge will put like an arrow or like a red pen line and just say like, oh, their point is crossed out because it flows, if that makes sense to you guys. So that means that technically the affirmation's first point is off the table or off this flowchart because the negation has refuted it. But we can see in the affirmation second speaker, Josh, might come up with new evidence and reasoning to support their first point. So they can like uncross it and be like, oh no, their first point still stands in this debate. So you can do it again with the second point and the second and refuting that. So yeah, that's basically how the judge weighs this debate and sees who is the winner if it's affirmation or negation. Yeah, thank you, Kayla, for doing that. So we can pause right there. So now we have the second speaker, affirmation, and it's Josh. So what he's going to do is refute those first, second, and third points that Kayla pointed with the blue line. So they're going to refute it. Remember how we said that you can minimize, outweigh, deny, or yeah, minimize, outweigh, or deny. And so that's how you can refute their first point. So you can say, they said blah, blah, blah. However, that is wrong because you can provide new evidence and new reasoning to that. And then the judge will be like, okay, maybe maybe the affirmation side is saying something good. So they're going to like cross the first point or something like that. So that's how it's going to work for the refutations for the first, second, and third points. Then after that, Josh is going to reinforce all the 3 points that I said, and he's going to provide as much new evidence and reasoning as he can. So with the first point of how we can have more of a democracy when we abolish the Electoral College, he's going to provide evidence saying like in 2016 we had the popular vote be with Hillary Clinton when she had more of the popular vote, but then Donald Trump got 370 votes with the Electoral College. That can be your new evidence for your first point as to why we should abolish the Electoral College, because it doesn't give a say in democracy. So that could be how you're restating your new evidence and new reasoning. This can also apply for your second and third points for affirmation. Now let's move on to the negation second speaker, which is Mohan. So what he's going to do is he's going to refute again the first point that Josh said with the new evidence and the new reasoning. Remember how I said, or Josh said, that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. So Mohan can say, well, we need the Electoral College because it provides checks and balances with having the electoral representatives for each state. Like with California, we have 55 representatives for the Electoral College, and that is helpful for the population distribution when we're doing the Electoral College. So he can say that for his reputation for the first point that Josh stated with his new evidence. And he's going to apply this, Mohan's going to apply this in his second and third point that Josh stated too. Then you also have to, again, like how Josh did, reinforce and strengthen all your 3 points and provide as much new evidence and reasoning as you can. So a lot of people have been asking me in the chat, how can we like find new evidence and reasoning? Obviously, when you're prepping for the round, you have to come up with evidence through like online internet and websites. So yeah, just look it up online and look at like evidence like 53% blah blah blah, or like how many Americans voted, something like that. You'll find a lot of data online. Trust me, you'll have enough time to find evidence and reasoning. And you may think that, oh, 20 minutes is not enough time to prep for this round, but it actually is enough time. So yeah, I think that's it for the negation. So that's it. Also, a lot of people have been asking me about where we can find these slides. We're gonna share this with you after the meeting because we want you like to know it and not like look at it. So we'll send it in the meeting. I mean, in the email. So yeah. Okay, now that the first 2 speakers of the affirmation and negation have finished with their 3 points and refuting their points, and then also with the first speaker defining the topic and providing Maytef, we have the rebuttal speeches. So we have the first speaker, Kayla, for the negation side, speaking for the rebuttal. So remember, you cannot give new points or evidence or reasoning. This is just a conclusion of the round. You have to provide a cohesive, like, speech into saying why the negation's plan or their points are better than the affirmation side. So again, you're going to defend your first, second, and third points and say these points still stand in this round, and that's why we should win. You could also explain how you refuted all their points and your points stand. So in many debates, there are times in Novice when the opposing side in affirmation or negation, they don't actually refute your points. So that could be a good plus for you guys. You could say, Judge, the opposing side has not refuted some of these points that I have made, so these points should still stand in this round, and that's why we should also be given the winnings. We should win in this debate. And then at the very end, at the very end, you have to weigh the impacts of this debate. So like Josh talked about the world comparison. So like you can ask, Judge, do you want to live in the affirmation side or like in the affirmations world where we only have the national popular vote, or do you want to live in our world where we have the electoral college and the national popular vote to have more of a distribution within the votes or something like that. And then this also applies for the third speaker, the last speech for affirmation, which is the rebuttal speech. So you cannot give new evidence or new points or reasoning or anything like that. You have to defend your 3 points, explain how you refuted them, and weigh the impacts. And then also state for both negation 3 and affirmation 3, you have to say how we talked about the weighing the impacts with the net benefits. So you have to talk about with the net benefits and on our side, we should win this debate. I don't think we have anything else to add. Do you guys have any questions? I know that I haven't provided like actual like points and evidence and reasoning. We're gonna do that in the next meeting with a new topic and make it more interactive, so you guys can understand how the flow goes and how the judge is also flowing in this. Yeah. You guys have any questions? Just like speak it out or put it in the chat. Oh, actually, we have 2 more slides. Caleb will talk about.
Okay, so prepping for round, we kind of talked about this throughout the presentation, but just try to use credible sources or be convincing when you lie. The thing about a lot of people in like previous years, you lie, you make up facts, you make up data, you make up studies, and you can do that unless, you do have that risk that the other team is going to call you out on it, but they probably won't because they don't know any better than you. But since our tournaments are sort of moving online, it's a bit more risky because I'm not exactly sure how the formatting of debate is going to be online, but you always have the internet as an access. So if you say something that they don't think is true, they can just like search it up. So it's going to be a lot more risky this year to lie about like your sources or lie about things that you found on the internet. And also in in-person debates, if you say a statistic or you say a fact and the other team is able to like say, if you don't say a source, the other team can call you out on it and say that we don't even know this is going to be true because you didn't provide a source. You could be completely making this fact up. Next slide. For generating arguments, just to kind of help you come up with ideas for your contentions, think about how does this affect the economy? How does it affect politics? And also try to think about the people that this affects, or who are the most important people we should care about and why. And then also, how do you link your plan with people not dying? Because ultimately, in the end, you're trying to say how your plan helps people and how there's, oh my God, a lot of people are going to die and a bunch of other things for your, One thing I wanted to add as we sort of end our meeting, we only have 7 minutes left, but this was a very information-heavy meeting. We talked about a lot of stuff. We covered a lot of information. So take time when we like give you the slides or whatever, if you have notes, take time to review your notes, take time to take a look back at the slides, because this is super important. The rest of the year is just going to be building upon what we learned today. We're just going to be going more into detail. We're probably going to be doing examples of debates and perhaps even scrimmages where you get to practice actually debating. So if you're a little bit confused right now, don't worry about it. Just try to digest that information by looking at the slides.
Yeah, I want to add to that too. So I know a lot of people wanted to discuss about current events and like actual information, but we wanted to provide you guys with the structure and format because this is your first year. So we want you guys to know the format. So like the judges could also see like, oh, we can see like Valley Christian students are following the format. So, you know, it helps with like speaker points and just making sure that you're following the flow for novice. Yeah.
One more thing I want to add.
Yeah.
I saw a question in the chat about like, do you have to study outside sources or whatever? A way that you can prepare for being able to know, maybe be a little bit familiar with the topic that you're going to be given at a debate round is just try to keep up with the news as much as possible. Maybe every day, just check the news and try to find things more about like policy, because that's really common for debate topics.
Yep. Yeah. Do you guys have any questions regarding anything about debate? I know we went really fast.
I have a question about the prep time.
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a 20-minute prep time before the debate begins, right? So when we're coming up with our evidence, do we use half of our evidence for the first time we speak and then the second half of our evidence for the next time we're talking? Or do we have time during the debate to come up with new evidence?
Yeah, so that's a good question. Prep time is prep time and debate rounds are debate rounds. You cannot have like access to the internet while you're doing your debates. So everything has to be prepared. Like you cannot come up with new evidence like while you're debating, but you can come up with like reasonings, and you know you have to improvise with refutations, right? But you can't come up with like new data. Sorry, you can't come up with like new data. Sorry, what was I saying? Yeah, you can't come up with new data while you're coming up doing the debate. So yeah, do it in the prep round.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, Haley. Yeah.
So if they have like for their the three like main points,
Yeah.
if you're like the negation side and you don't know what they're like gonna present, so when they present, like like you didn't prep it, but like you already know what the answer is gonna be to negate theirs. Is that okay?
Yeah, that's like the special part of parliamentary. You don't know what the other side is going to say because this is all improvising with and also coming up with the plan for your side. So yeah, you don't really know what the other side is going to say. You have to at least come up with some refutations for the opposing side. Like when I do debates, I usually, if let's say, Haley, you're affirmation and I am negation, I have no idea what your points are. I've only come up with my points and my evidence. And so you say your 3 points, and then I, during the debate, have to think and see, oh, how can I refute the first point that she said with my information? Does that make sense? Yeah. Thank you for asking that.
Also, during your prep time, if you have like extra time available, it's not a bad idea to try to think about what the other team could possibly say to your contentions, because that will only like strengthen your contentions and just make it a lot less stressful when you're actually in the debate round, because maybe some resource you found on the internet, you were able to find good points that could attack your contentions. So that's just something that you can do if you have extra time.
Yeah, parliamentary is like one of those special debates where you have to be very critical with your thinking skills. There are other types of debates that everything is prepped, so you have like the affirmation and negation speeches already prepared. Like they give you the topic like 1 month in advance. That's called public forum debate, but we don't do that here. We do parliamentary debate, which is like coming up with contentions and evidence like in your prep round before the debate round.
Any more questions?
Yeah, so for debate, is it like more beneficial to like talk really fast or like slow?
Yeah, that's a good question. Kayla, do you want to answer it?
Yeah, sure. At your level, since you guys are novice, just try to talk at a good pace. Like you don't worry about going super fast. Varsity people, they do this, I don't know what it's called, but they talk like really, really fast. You could barely hear what they're saying. And I'm not kidding when I say you cannot understand what they're saying.
I forgot
But
the word.
yeah, I know. It's called like, I feel like it starts with a C. I don't know. But since you guys are novice, just try to be as clear as possible, because since you are going to have like parent judges for novice compared to like JV and varsity where they have more experienced judges, the parents don't really know a lot about the topic either. So just try to be really clear, get your point across, and don't try to go super fast because you're trying to fill up as much time as possible. I hope that answers your question. Anything else?
I think that's it.
Are there any examples of like debates online, like varsity or novice debate?
Yeah, we do have some really old videos on our YouTube channel. We could put that in the email so you guys could see the examples. But we will probably do like in the future debate meetings, we'll probably do an active or like a live scrimmage between the officers, so you could see how like the word is called spreading, Kayla. When they talk really fast, they spread. Yeah, that's when like you can't even understand what they're saying. But you guys don't have to worry about that. So yeah, we will probably be doing some live examples of the type of debates and the type of topics in the debate, and you'll see how um, how loud it gets. Not very loud, but yeah. So yeah, thank you guys for coming. You guys can go do your homework and eat food. Bye. We'll see you next meeting.
Bye. Thanks for coming.
I have one more question.
Uh-huh.
When are scrimmages?
Are you saying what are scrimmages or
No,
when?
when? Because in the very first meeting, you mentioned that they were on Thursday. I don't know if they're still on Thursday or if they're going on.
Yeah, so we still because of hybrid, the schedule keeps changing, so we're not really sure how we're gonna like work it out. We do want to have like the Thursday optional scrimmages. We just want to see if people are willing to, attend a second debate meeting. Because last year we used to have two debate meetings each week, like Mondays and Wednesdays. So everyone would come Monday to do a lecture, and then Wednesday we would do scrimmages. But because of hybrid and Zoom, we don't want to put too much pressure on you guys. So that's why we said we'll have one mandatory meeting a week and then the optional scrimmages. So yeah, thank you for asking that question.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Okay. We'll wait for, I think they're in the breakout rooms.
Oh wait, do you guys have any more questions? Nope.
Nope. Okay, we'll stay here. I think they're still discussing in the breakout rooms. So we'll stay here. It's still recording. I can pause the recording.
Yeah, you can stop this.